Alright everyone, we start off today talking about Biden's failure in Afghanistan. It will of course be blamed on Orange Man. I'll explain how they'll eventually do that, but essentially the airstrikes that were conducted the other day in Afghanistan against Taliban targets are an admission of failure of peace negotiations in that country. Keeping in mind, we were supposed to leave in May. Biden pushed that back, and the problem with the kind of diplomacy you have to engage in with some of the tribal warlords there that are reluctant to side maybe with the Taliban, but they're not really in league with the Afghan government directly. The problem is that they consider that insulting. If you know anything about diplomacy with regards to non-Western nations, it isn't conducted the same way. This is why Trump was really good when it came to negotiating peace in the Middle East, trade deals in Asia, and this is why the DPRK opened up a little bit. This is why Biden will fail in all of these ventures, because he's a standard empty suit from D.C. and doesn't understand these cultures and relies upon aides and staffers that, of course, have neoliberal globalized interests. Now, link in the description archived, of course, to this story that I'll get into. But first and foremost as well, 4 links down below if you're watching on YouTube in a pinned comment. Keep in mind, 2 videos a day go on those sites that don't go on YouTube. This is because of subject matter or simply because of overflow. YouTube already punishes every independent creator anyway. If you make more than a video or 2 a day, it punishes you even more in the algorithms. So there's no point to actually being a workhorse anymore on the site. It's no longer about broadcasting yourself. Really, 90% of the site now, if you search for anything, is astroturfed nonsense, or it's boring, like lamestream dumbed down shit like from the Young Turks and stuff like that, CNN. Now, these strikes to stop the Taliban advancing, specifically in some of the Kandahar, Kabul, some of the regions that are held by the Afghan forces, which have, by and large, laid down their arms and refused to fight at all. When the Taliban has, in the course of a couple of months, over on half of Afghanistan, the writing is kind of on the wall. And the thing is that the way in which they're announcing these strikes against the Taliban, it sounds awfully open-ended, like basically, oh, we're trying to stop their advance. If it doesn't work, we're going to do it again. Well, then how is this fundamentally that different from before the peace negotiations? We only had a small number of physical troops in Afghanistan anyway, certainly enough to garrison maybe Kabul. That's basically it. We had less than 1,000 troops towards the end in the physical country itself. Now we're relying upon air strikes. We've tried this before. I know it's fun to deploy all sorts of wonderful technology. Nobody really cares about fighting the Taliban. It's not even a state entity. It's one that's not even wanted around by the Afghan government, and we operate with their specific permission most of the time. The problem is that over time, drone strikes, air strikes, they cause civilian casualties. And the fact is that Biden screwed the pooch. Trump had negotiated a withdrawal in May. Because of the diplomatic nature of non-Western nations, as I explained, it gave propaganda material to the Taliban to recruit in the rural regions that had already had support in, essentially the ability to get more manpower, to take more land without a shot fired and make life a living hell for the Afghan government. And that's because Biden pushed the withdrawal back. He did this for self-serving political purposes. The idea was that he didn't want to give Trump credit for ending America's longest war. Technically, that's not true. The Korean War is still technically a hot war. It's just got a ceasefire at the moment and has for decades that is routinely ignored. That being said, and Trump getting credit for that, that'd be a bad thing now, wouldn't it? Biden wanted credit. So in order to do that, he had to change the ramifications of the deal. Well, we'll push it back a few months. Now, when Afghanistan begins to destabilize, what and he already has alluded to this, others have as well, so my prediction was fulfilled. They allude to Trump being responsible on the idea that, well, they shouldn't have withdrawn so soon. Trump never should have negotiated it in the first place. Therefore, my hands were tied. I had no choice but to withdraw. I did the best that I could by being more orderly because Trump, of course, he's supposedly deranged and shoots from the hip all the time. I tried to salvage it. I made it more orderly. I begged the Afghan government, let us stay for a few more months, and we're still going to strike the Taliban by air, but it's so open-ended, it's like the war is still going. That's what we were doing most of the time anyway. Most of our operations in Afghanistan over the last few years haven't been really on-the-ground troop-related maneuvers. They've been drone strikes, air strikes, getting intel for the Afghan forces. The Afghan forces that 9 times out of 10 don't even seem to want to actually fight, because they know in many engagements they'll probably lose. The Afghanistan managed to defeat the Soviets. The insurgent forces in Afghanistan, they destroyed the Soviets. There are still monuments to this out in the middle of nowhere, piles of burned out tanks and stuff. They've managed to, for 2 decades straight, repel U.S. efforts in the region, preventing the restoration of order outside of urban areas mainly. What more need we say? Afghanistan was lost the second we went in. The first victory we could have had was not invading in the first place. That's Bush's fault. The second victory was that Obama should have upheld what he stated he wanted to do and leave Afghanistan. He kept kicking the can down the road. Trump didn't leave Afghanistan until the 11th hour. He finally brokers the withdrawal. Leaves it for Biden, of course, and this was also strategic theater. And then Biden says, okay, well, we'll withdraw. But we're going to continue conducting airstrikes, and we're going to do it several months later than we initially agreed on with the Afghan government. That's a good way to hand Afghanistan over to the Taliban. I'm sorry to say, but there's now a better than 50-50 chance that within a year or two the Afghan government falls, and it goes right back to how it was before we went there in the first place. Let well enough alone. It's Afghanistan. It doesn't matter. Let the people have self-determination. And what difference does it make if you're being tyrannized by a puppet government or a fanatic group of clerics anyway? It's not our land. It's a landlocked, irrelevant country for the most part, that every country that tries to invade or even go through takes massive attrition because it's so inhospitable. There really was no purpose. Mostly it was about opium. It was about supplying China with cheap opium poppies so that they could make more fentanyl and re-import it to the United States through the FBI mainly. It's just funny. Did you know that the individual that's tapped ahead the Biden's ATF actually was involved in Fast and Furious? Most people don't even talk about that. They know vaguely about his connections to the Waco massacre when the U.S. government decided to burn a bunch of kids, and that's what happened. It's not a conspiracy theory. I think at some point you got to admit to the fairly obvious and observable. Afghanistan's lost. I feel sorry for the millions of people in Afghanistan in the more urban areas living like a kind of sort of normal life. But maybe, arguably, at some point, life might get better for them under the fucking Taliban. Because it certainly hasn't gotten better for them by and large over the last couple of decades of occupation. At what point is Biden going to option the idea of putting troops back into the country? that could be, I'm sure that it's literally on the table. Because the Afghan government's too weak to fight for itself. You have video, Taliban uses it for propaganda, by the way, of large columns of Afghan troops. They've been trained by the U.S. military. They've got all the last-gen goods that they could need. They've got the body armor and fucking the assault rifles and the machine guns and grenades and rocket launchers and all these toys. They have fucking APCs and shit. They still can't do anything. And these are native Afghans. These aren't, to be clear, these aren't people from Kansas that moved in and decided to guard the street corners. These are people that live and work and thrive in that country too, that just don't want theocratic rule. But anyway, it's so hyper-religious, it's like one step from Taliban rule at any given moment anyway. And it's Biden's fault. But again, they will blame it on Orange Man. Trump shouldn't have brokered withdrawal for after his presidency. Trump shouldn't have brokered it to be so quick. He should have known that we couldn't have an orderly withdrawal of less than 1,000 men, by the way, in that time period. Oh my God, the Taliban got our air base. Who cares? It's Afghanistan. We've been there most of my adult life. We invade at the dawn of the Bush presidency. We've been there ever since. And now you've got this indefinite clusterfuck, which is going to be the U.S. continuing to waste money, bombing the Taliban, and it's not going to do anything. Giving a small amount of air support to the Afghan government is probably not going to prevent anything other than maybe Kabul and its surrounding areas from falling. The Taliban eventually will launch offensives on a larger scale at urban areas, and once those trade routes and travel lanes are cut off by the Taliban, the Afghan government, which is fielding a modern-style military, something modeled on the U.S. military. Despite the fact that they have localized resources, they're still reliant upon shipments of goods from outside of Afghanistan. How are we going to get into them? No, they'll starve. Know what they'll do? The Taliban will lay siege to some of these smaller cities and starve them out. And the local population we don't even necessarily have a real grasp on how popular the Afghan government is. Because the Obama administration decided that propaganda through lamestream legacy media networks and big tech was now okay again, and rescinded the long-standing rule against that, we Americans and Westerners in general could be seeing propaganda that's totally different anyway. Push polls. Oh yeah, 90% of the Afghans don't want the Taliban to take control. Well, first and foremost, even if that's true, 10% of the population is supporting an insurgency. They control half the country. It doesn't matter if they're controlling the outland rural regions. If anything, strategically, that's more important. More than half the land area of Afghanistan is at least contested. So, what point can we say then another fucking failure for Joe Biden that he'll blame on Orange Man? If Afghanistan falls, if you see the Taliban's flag or like Al-Qaeda dancing around in Kabul, first thing that they'll do is release a speech. Well, I tried to salvage the situation. I feel sorry for the Afghan people. Trump really let them down. That's about all. Peace out.